Hello, this is Lydia from Remember the Joy Counseling. Today is April 24th, and we had a great Neuroscience Friday class. So unfortunately, we were not able to record it, so I wanted to take this opportunity to review some of the things that we discussed in a shorter form. This week during meditation class, Missy McConkey, our fearless leader, was leading us through a couple of meditation choices, and one of those was a walking meditation, which we had ample conversation about regarding what that was like. And it was nice to hear that people have been practicing that. But also we had a briefer meditation on how to really be present with emotions. And that's what we dug a little deeper into today. Digging deep into what it feels like to have an emotion, to what it feels like, not in the cognitive sense, but more how the emotions arise. And one of the things we did was review what's going on with emotion. I like the idea of really recognizing that emotion is energy in motion. And that kind of doesn't always come through quite as clearly when we're in it. So that takes us to review on the brain what's really going on. When we have a word or when we use an assessment for emotion, that's using that cortex of our brain, that part of the brain that's really able to think and have a process. And when we're able to recognize it, that requires a good portion of our prefrontal cortex, remember that V8 spot, of being able to have autobiographical information, that sense of who I was and who I will become. Something also that's pretty pertinent to this part of the brain is a sense of time. The time in terms of, I know that what's going on right now is just temporary, or I know what was happening in the past and what will happen in the future. When we are taken over by a sense of dis-ease or dysregulation, where we get it in our body sense that we're not okay, some kind of emotion that's overwhelming, we're actually dealing with a different part of our brain. We're dealing with that limbic brain we've discussed, and also the brainstem. So the brainstem has a lot of those truly protective features of all of our automatic functions. So, the heart rate, the digestion, etc. But what really comes up for emotions is we're going to feel it in our body first. It's very easy to jump to what's the word or the assessment, but that's a pretty high brain function. When we're really allowing ourselves to deepen the practice of being aware of emotions, it is really the body sensation. Remember, we're always trying to reset our nervous system. So that's dedicated to our lizard brain, the brain stem, and that's that mammal part of our brain that contains our friend amygdala. So remember, amygdala is making sure that we're safe, and it has a pretty limited value system. It's basically, are we safe? Are we not safe? And once amygdala doesn't feel like we're safe, we really run into our three protective emotions. Now, of course, we have more than three emotions, but we have three primary protective emotions. And there's anger, there's fear, and there's sadness. Those are the primary protective emotions. Those are the ones we're really born with. So sadness causes us to withdraw, or it causes us to slow down, and it really helps point out the things that we're afraid we might lose. So we can see this, especially as we're developing, we are trying to regulate our nervous system primarily through our connections with others. So anger comes up and it really pushes us to fight, or it pushes us to put energy toward what we want and away from what we don't want. And fear, of course, tells us to run if something's coming at us, not to think about it. So that's the challenge when we try to name an emotion before we really feel it. We're trying to use that wizard or doc part of our brain when it may not even be online. So recall, in our brain model, the limbic brain might just overwhelm the rest of the brain, and we might flip our lid. In a meditation practice, when we're really focusing on being with an emotion, being with the sensations in the body first, we're strengthening our ability to be able to experience the emotion and stay connected. It's a beautiful practice. So during our during our class today, we spent some time really experiencing the difference between naming the sensation of the emotion. I feel tension in my stomach. I feel tight across my chest. My shoulders are tight. Really being able to be present with the sensation of the emotion before we try to name it. And we've practiced that before. The challenge one of the participants came up with is when she tries to be present with her emotions, she finds that she starts to get into the why question. And that is a function of this guy. The doc part of our brain wants to understand why. Now, of course, we're hardwired to want to make sense of our story, but sometimes we don't have that connection to know why. In fact, that's taking the overwhelm of the emotional brain and trying to use the part that's not really online anymore, especially when we're having conflict with another person or trying to support a child. When we ask why, we're trying to access this really thought part of our mind when we're living currently in the limbic brain. So we're separating the difference between how it feels in the body, being able to be present with that, even if we don't know, because many times it's many emotions. Those primary emotions often don't even have words to go with them, the anger, the sadness, and the fear. The rest are considered secondary emotions, the ones that are more nuanced or more, situation dependent, ennui or, angst or dread or even anticipation. Those are all secondary emotions. Those are the ones that we develop in reaction to our experiences in the world. So we can spend a little less time worrying about what the right word is and be present with the experience. Notice it. Often what happens is we get into what many neuroscientists have called the depression bias, or I would think of as the overactivation bias, when the nervous system itself feels so overwhelmed that we are offline with our thinking brain. So the depressive bias or the overreactive bias doesn't have that sense of time. And again, time is a function of that more frontal lobe of the brain, which means we lose connection with the memory that things have been better and this belief that things will be better. In the moment, that bias says, this is it, this is all, this is as awful as it ever has been, and it will never get better. We really get stuck with that sense that nothing will change. The best way we can integrate time back into our experience is with the breath. So remember, we did that deep breath and that long out breath. That helps us re-engage the thinking part of our brain to reconnect with that sense of time, that what I'm going through now isn't forever. We're setting that energy back into emotion, that emotion. So we're going to practice that, or we practice that for quite some time, but we'll do a little taste right now. We want to start with 3 reset breaths, and I'm going to tap a rhythm to follow along. The breath is going to be 4 beats in and 6 beats out. Now, we've talked in a previous class that sometimes it's hard to bring in a deep breath when you're tense. So we'll start with the out breath. And again, we're using all of the muscles in our chest, all of the muscles in our stomach to really push out the breath. So I'm going to tap a rhythm, and we'll start with the out breath. So just take a quickie in, and 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Good. In for 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. Out for 6. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. In for 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. And out for 6. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Now you might have noticed, just notice what's different in your body by doing those 3 reset breaths. We are essentially using your neurobiology to tell your amygdala that we're okay, so you can take a little nap and just, chill out for a while. What we're doing in meditation when we are regulating the breath and we're taking the time to be present with whatever emotion arises is we're setting a new pattern. The old pattern was to feel the anger and feel the anxiety or whatever was coming up, and to immediately have the response of resisting it, of going into clenching or to tightness or to resistance. It's common to know that what we resist persists. What we put energy into fighting is exactly what our mind will continue to focus on. And we also know that what wires together fires together. So, this concept of being accepting of what emotions come and then pairing it instead of with the resistance, pair it instead with, anger has arrived, is at the table. Like Missy said, set a place for anger. Anger is here. The old style would be to go, "Ugh," but now we can go, anger is here, and really feel the anger, or tension, the tightness, and then anxiety is here. So we notice the anxiety and pair it with the breath. What we're doing is taking patterns that have been repeated over and over and resetting them to a new pattern. So you feel the experience, and instead of the resistance to it, now we push through it. I think of the breath as returning to the energy in motion, the emotion. A lot of times we're very concerned or worried that if we put our focus and our attention on these overwhelming emotions, that they will become more dominant. And actually, the opposite is true. It may have a rise in our experience, but very quickly, once it's acknowledged, it moves through. Just as when a child is very upset and they're crying, if you listen to what that child is saying, say, wow, you were really upset. This is so big for you. They will get the full experience of their expression and feel heard, and it dissipates quickly. Whereas when we resist and persist saying, oh, you're okay, don't worry about it, here's a cookie, they will get louder and louder because they really want to be heard. Now, that leads us to another theme that we came up with today in our class, was as we try to separate our assessment of the feeling, oh, that's anger because blah, 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 and the actual sensation of the feeling, we pay attention to the story that's being told about the situation. So if I think, oh, that person's upset with me because, et cetera, that story in itself might be what's bringing up the emotion rather than the situation. So we pay attention to the sensation and then the assessment. So what am I calling that sensation? And maybe not in the moment, right? But later think, what was it I was thinking? What's the story I was telling myself? You know, for example, someone cut me off on the freeway, like who's driving these days, but someone cut me off on the freeway. They must think I'm a terrible driver and they're really angry at me. So that story is going to lead to more anger. But as one of our participants said, she's like, what I try to do is just imagine that person has a different story, that somebody cuts me off on the freeway and I think, wow, they must be really frustrated with something that happened at home. It helps shift that it's not about me. So valuable to be with the emotions and hear the stories that we're trying to tell ourselves. And maybe consciously pay attention to what are the stories that get repeated that might take me back down the endless loops of rabbit holes of anxiety or of regret. We talked about the twin bullies of if being that little word that seems pretty innocuous, but when you say, oh, what if this happens, what if that happens, and you go down so many paths of what could happen, none of it is now. Or the other if bully is if only that hadn't happened, if only she hadn't said that. Again, it's a story we tell ourselves that's not now. So the meditation practice of being mindful with your emotions, we don't need to start with the big ones. We can start with the small emotions. Peter Levine describes it beautifully, of how we set with an emotion or we set with an experience and we find balance in that piece, just in the here and now. And then we bring a little tension. We think about something that's slightly difficult and use the breath to return. Or we talk about something that's a little challenging or frustrating, and then we reset. So he calls that pendulation. And that's one of his key pieces in working with trauma. Throughout all of this, what we're really trying to do is set up a regular pattern in our breath and in our nervous system that we're always calming amygdala so we can bring the messages online from that lower brain, the mammal brain, and bring the doc brain back online. So in your practice, being aware of emotions, following some of those wonderful meditations that Missy has found for us, and being mindful, practicing the new pattern of feeling the experience and settling back into it with that long exhale, putting the emotion back into motion. So there's your challenge. There's a lot of information all at once. I've included some links with this video to help illustrate some of the things we've discussed. And in your practice, play with that. Play with the small things to keep the breath going, setting up a new pattern that subconscious pairing of a nice deep breath, long breath with challenging experiences will slowly become more part of the wiring of your brain. Right here in the place behind your eyes that keeps us connected to our emotions and to our thinking brain. So this has been Lydia from Remember the Joy Counseling. Please feel free to visit my website. Always open to more suggestions of what you'd like to, and it's been an honor to explore neuroscience and meditation. Bye.